According to the trashy romance novel I transmigrated into, I was supposed to throw a glass of water at the innocent female lead and scream at her to stay away from my billionaire fiancé. Instead, I handed her a check for $10 million to dump him. She didn't just take the money, she took my corporate advice. Now, his ex-secretary is my new business partner, our luxury empire is taking over the city, and the toxic CEO. Completely broke, single, and crying in the dust. We threw away his script, built an empire, and found the high-value men who actually know how to treat a queen. Grab some popcorn, because this is how you rewrite a villainess's destiny.
Chapter 1: The Water That Became Gold. The ambient jazz humming through the hidden speakers of L'Etoile was meant to soothe the nerves of Paris's elite, but today, it only heightened the tension vibrating near the corner booth. Vivian Vance stared down at the glass of sparkling water in her hand. The crystal was heavy, condensation weeping down its sides to pool on the pristine white tablecloth. According to the cosmic joke that was her life, she had exactly 60 seconds to throw this water directly into the face of the trembling, doe-eyed girl sitting across from her. 3 days ago, Vivian had been an overworked corporate restructuring consultant in Chicago who died from a combination of espresso overdose and spreadsheet fatigue. Now, she was the villainous supporting female lead in a trashy, melodramatic web novel titled The CEO's Boundless Obsession. Her designated role in this scene was simple: catch her arrogant fiancé, Julian Sterling, secretly meeting with his impoverished, innocent secretary, Chloe Lin. Vivian was supposed to fly into a hysterical, classist rage, splash the water, and scream, "You low-class leech, stay away from Julian. You're not worthy to even breathe the same air as him." Vivian looked across the table. Chloe Lin looked less like a romantic heroine and more like a stiff breeze could knock her over. She was clutching a canvas tote bag to her chest, her oversized glasses slipping down her nose, eyes wide with a mixture of terror and utter exhaustion. Vivian knew from the novel's plot that Chloe had been working 3 jobs to pay off her family's medical debt while enduring Julian's toxic, moody tantrums at Sterling Enterprises. Why am I fighting over a toxic man who treats boundaries like suggestions? Vivian thought, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her lips. I have a net worth of 9 figures in this world. Let's restructure this script. Vivian, Chloe stammered, her voice shaking. It's not what you think. Mr. Sterling only asked me to bring these quarterly reports to his weekend brunch. I didn't mean to disturb your engagement. Chloe, Vivian interrupted, her voice smooth as silk. She set the glass of water down with a soft, deliberate clink. Chloe flinched, bracing for the impact of cold water and sharp insults. Instead, Vivian reached into her monogrammed Chanel handbag. She didn't pull out a weapon or a threatening legal notice. She pulled out a sleek, matte black fountain pen and a personalized checkbook from the Royal Bank of Geneva. With elegant, practiced strokes, Vivian filled out the lines. $10 million. She tore the check from the book with a crisp, satisfying rip and slid it across the white tablecloth, stopping at precisely 3 inches from Chloe's trembling fingers. What is this? Chloe whispered, squinting through her glasses at the staggering string of zeros. This is your exit strategy, Vivian said, leaning back against the plush velvet booth, crossing her legs elegantly. The rules are simple. Take this check, cash it immediately, resign from Sterling Enterprises before 5 p.m. today, and never answer another one of Julian's midnight phone calls again. Chloe stared at the check. Her breath hitched. You want me to leave him? For money? $10 million, tax-free, fully cleared, Vivian clarified, tapping her manicured nail against the table. Look at yourself, Chloe. You're working 80 hours a week, getting paid pennies, and dealing with a boss who throws temper tantrums when his macchiato isn't exactly 145 degrees. Is his brooding, emotionally stunted scowl really worth the gray hairs you're developing at 23? Chloe's jaw dropped slightly. The script was veering so far off the rails that the invisible hands of fate seemed to stall. She looked at the check. $10 million meant her mother's medical bills were gone. It meant she could pay off her student loans. It meant she could finally buy the commercial kitchen space she had secretly spent nights sketching in her diary. But Chloe swallowed hard, looking up, a strange spark replacing the tears in her eyes. Mr. Sterling said. He said I was his irreplaceable assistant. He said I belonged by his side. He's a narcissist who uses company property to fund his savior complex, Vivian said bluntly. So, what's it going to be? Do you want to be the tragic heroine of a corporate melodrama, or do you want to be a multimillionaire before dessert arrives? Chloe didn't hesitate. Her hand shot out like a striking viper, snatching the check off the table. She stuffed it deep inside her canvas tote bag, zipping it shut with a definitive thwack. I'll have my resignation letter on his desk in 20 minutes, Chloe said, her entire demeanor transforming. The trembling stopped. The doe-eyed innocence vanished, replaced by the sharp, calculating gaze of a woman who had just realized she never had to endure a corporate performance review ever again. Actually, scratch that. I'm texting it to him. Why waste the paper? Vivian let out a sharp, genuine laugh. I knew I liked you. Sit back down, Chloe. Let's look at the menu. The lobster thermidor here is excellent, and since I just bought your freedom, you can let me buy you lunch. Deal, Chloe said, pulling herself closer to the table, a radiant, triumphant grin breaking across her face. From the mezzanine level of the restaurant, a tall, imposing figure in a bespoke Tom Ford suit stood watching them. Julian Sterling had expected a scene. He had intentionally orchestrated this crossover, wanting to see his fiery fiancé put his sweet, submissive secretary in her place so he could swoop in, play the hero, and assert his dominance over both women. Instead, he watched his secretary laugh, high-five his fiancé, and flag down the waiter to order a bottle of Dom Perignon. Julian frowned, a profound, unsettling wave of confusion washing over him. What the hell just happened? Chapter 2, Scaling Up and Checking Out. The afternoon sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Vivian's high-rise penthouse, illuminating a massive mahogany table covered in architectural blueprints, financial spreadsheets, and a dozen half-eaten artisanal pastries. It had been 3 weeks since the incident at L'Etoile. True to her word, Chloe had resigned instantly, leaving Julian's inbox a chaotic mess of unread emails and missed appointments. But instead of disappearing into early retirement, Chloe had done something Vivian hadn't anticipated. She called Vivian back. The pastry market in the Upper East District is entirely oversaturated with generic, mass-produced French concepts, Chloe explained, her voice sharp and commanding as she tapped a red marker against a map of the city. Gone were the oversized glasses and baggy sweaters. She wore a tailored emerald blazer, her hair pinned up in a chic, effortless twist. But a botanical-infused, high-end artisanal bakery that pairs functional wellness ingredients with luxury pâtisserie? No one is doing it. Not at scale. Vivian watched her with deep appreciation. In the original novel, Chloe's baking skills were merely a cute hobby used to charm Julian's stern grandfather. In reality, Chloe had a brilliant mind for supply chain logistics and a palate that could identify regional butter variants by scent alone. The numbers look incredibly solid, Chloe, Vivian said, reviewing the spreadsheets. Your projected ROI for the first flagship location is 24% within the first 8 months. But if we expand the concept to include a private, members-only tea salon in the back, we can triple the high-margin revenue. A luxury membership model for the elite tea crowd? Chloe's eyes lit up. Vivian, you're a genius. With your capital and corporate structuring experience, and my product development, we could franchise this within 2 years. Then it's official, Vivian said, raising her coffee mug. We are co-founders of Flora and Crumb. Before Chloe could clink her mug against Vivian's, the heavy oak doors of the penthouse burst open. Julian Sterling strode into the room like a dark cloud looking for a storm. His tie was slightly loosened, his usually immaculate hair a bit disheveled. For 3 weeks, he had been trying to track down Chloe, convinced that Vivian had threatened her into hiding. He had used his corporate security team to trace Chloe's recent movements, only to discover she was spending every waking hour at his fiancé's private residence. Vivian. What is the meaning of this? Julian roared, slamming his leather briefcase onto the edge of the mahogany table, completely ignoring the fragile pastry samples. Chloe, don't be afraid. I know my fiancé has used her family's influence to intimidate you. I'm here to take you back. Your position at Sterling Enterprises is still open, and I personally doubled your salary. Chloe looked at Julian, then at the scattered blueprints of her multi-million-dollar business empire, and then back to Julian. She looked profoundly unimpressed. Mr. Sterling, Chloe said, her tone professional but dripping with ice. First of all, this is a private residence, and your lack of boundaries is bordering on a legal liability. Second of all, I am no longer your secretary. I am the chief operating officer of Flora and Crumb. Julian blinked, his dark eyes darting between the two women. What? Coup? Chloe, you're an innocent girl from the suburbs. She's manipulating you. Vivian is a ruthless, cold-hearted woman who is only using you to get back at me because she knows I don't love her. Vivian stifled a yawn, leaning back in her chair. Julian, darling, please lower your voice. You're vibrating at a frequency that is ruining the crumb structure of these croissants. You. Julian pointed a furious finger at Vivian. We have an arrangement. Our families have a merger contract. You're supposed to be planning our wedding, not playing house with my staff. The merger contract was dissolved by my family office yesterday morning at 9 a.m., Vivian said smoothly, taking a slow sip of her coffee. Your board of directors should be notifying you right about now. Right on cue, Julian's smartphone began to buzz violently in his pocket. He ignored it, his face flushing a deep, dangerous crimson. The absolute certainty he usually carried, the unshakable belief that he was the center of the universe, was cracking. You think you can just buy people off, Vivian? Julian hissed, stepping closer to the table. You think money solves everything? It solved my student debt, paid off my mom's oncology treatments, and bought me a 40% stake in a luxury startup, Chloe piped up cheerfully, leaning over the table with a bright smile. So, yes, Mr. Sterling. In this specific scenario, Vivian's money solved literally everything. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have an appointment with our venture capital consultant in 20 minutes. Consultant? Julian echoed, feeling completely out of his depth. The penthouse elevator doors chimed open again, saving Julian from further embarrassment. A tall man stepped out. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit that made Julian's Tom Ford look almost pedestrian. He possessed a sharp, aristocratic jawline, eyes the color of a stormy sea, and an aura of quiet, immense power that immediately commanded the room. Alexander Thorne. The youngest, most ruthless venture capitalist on the East Coast, and Julian Sterling's primary rival in the luxury real estate sector. Am I interrupting something, ladies? Alexander asked, his deep voice carrying a hint of dark amusement as his eyes swept over the room, pausing briefly on the furious Julian before locking onto Vivian. Vivian felt a sudden, electric jolt in her chest. Unlike Julian's loud, aggressive arrogance, Alexander carried himself with the calm confidence of a man who owned the mountain everyone else was climbing. Not at all, Mr. Thorne, Vivian said, standing up and smoothing down her skirt, her heart giving an uncharacteristic flutter. We were just finishing up some garbage disposal. Please, come in. Alexander smiled, a slow, devastatingly handsome smirk that told Vivian he knew exactly what was happening. Excellent. Let's talk about your expansion plans. I brought the initial term sheet. Julian stood frozen, completely ignored by both women and his fiercest rival, looking like a man who had walked into the wrong movie. Chapter 3, The Botanical Architect. The air inside the grand glass conservatories of the Hayes Botanical Estate didn't smell like the polluted, exhaust-heavy streets of the city's financial district. It smelled of damp earth, blooming jasmine, and the crisp, clean scent of crushed mint. Chloe Lin adjusted the collar of her cream silk blouse, her eyes wide with absolute wonder. She was holding a leather-bound notebook, her pen flying across the page as she catalogued the varieties of edible flora surrounding her. If we use the organic, cold-pressed lavender extract from the French Mediterranean hybrid variety, Chloe murmured, almost to herself, the bitterness will completely disappear when baked at 350 degrees. It will leave nothing but a delicate, buttery floral note. Actually, if you want to completely eliminate the bitterness without overloading the batter with sugar, you should look at the English Munstead cultivar, a warm, baritone voice corrected gently. Chloe turned around, her heart skipping a beat. Emerging from a row of towering, vibrant green ferns was a man who looked like he had been sculpted by nature itself. Oliver Hayes wore a casual, slate-gray button-down with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with lean muscle and dusted with faint freckles from hours spent under the sun. He had unruly, sun-bleached brown hair, eyes the color of rich, warm amber, and a gentle, lopsided smile that instantly made Chloe's cheeks flush. He wasn't like the men Chloe had been forced to deal with at Sterling Enterprises. He didn't wear a sharp, armor-like suit, and he didn't radiate an aggressive, suffocating aura of corporate dominance. Oliver looked grounded, peaceful, and entirely comfortable in his own skin. "You must be Miss Lin," Oliver said, wiping his hands on a clean linen towel before offering one to her. His grip was firm, warm, and calloused in a way that spoke of hard, honest work. "Vivian phoned ahead and told me a brilliant culinary mastermind was coming to raid my greenhouses." Chloe's blush deepened, but she held his gaze, a rare confidence blooming in her chest. "And you're the famous botanical architect. Vivian says your organic extracts are the best on the eastern seaboard." "Only because I talked to the plants," Oliver teased, his amber eyes crinkling at the corners. He gestured for her to follow him deeper into the conservatory. "Come. Let me show you the rare white velvet roses. Their petals have a natural, honey-like sweetness. I hear you're looking for a signature flavor for your flagship tea salon." As they walked, Chloe found herself talking more than she ever had in her life. With Julian, she had always been walking on eggshells, filtering her thoughts to avoid bruising his fragile, explosive ego. But with Oliver, her ideas flowed effortlessly. When she explained the complex molecular chemistry of infusing botanical oils into high-fat pastries, Oliver didn't look bored or dismissive. He listened with absolute fascination, his eyes locked onto her face, hanging on her every word. "You're incredible, Chloe," Oliver said softly, stopping near a beautiful cluster of ivory blossoms. He reached out, gently plucking a perfect, pristine petal and handing it to her. His fingers brushed against hers, sending a sudden, electric shiver straight down her spine. "I've met a lot of bakers and entrepreneurs, but I've never met anyone who understands the soul of a plant the way you do." Chloe looked down at the petal in her hand, her heart pounding against her ribs. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen, not as a tool, not as an assistant, and not as a tragic victim to be rescued. She was seen as an equal. An expert. A woman. Meanwhile, on the patio overlooking the sprawling estate gardens, Vivian Vance was casually lounging on a wrought iron chaise, scrolling through her tablet. She glanced up, catching sight of Chloe and Oliver through the glass walls of the conservatory. They were laughing, their shoulders brushing as they leaned over a shared tray of seedlings. Matchmaking, successful, Vivian thought with a satisfied smirk. Her tablet chimed, interrupting her thoughts. An email notification popped up from Thorne Ventures. From Alexander Thorne. To Vivian Vance. Subject, term sheet revisions and dinner. Vivian. I've reviewed your adjusted operational budget for Flora and Crumb. Your risk mitigation strategy regarding the supply chain is aggressive, yet flawlessly calculated. I accept your terms. However, I prefer to sign contracts over a proper meal. Pick you up at 8. We're something that handles a breeze, I know a place with a view. Alexander. Vivian's lips curved into a slow, intrigued smile. Alexander Thorne didn't play games, but he certainly knew how to command attention. He wasn't intimidated by her sharp intellect or her newfound corporate ruthlessness. In fact, he seemed actively fueled by it. Charming, Vivian whispered to herself, typing a quick, single-word reply, deal. Chapter 4, Risk and Return. The rooftop restaurant of the Zenith offered a panoramic, breathtaking view of the city skyline, the glittering lights stretching out like a blanket of fallen stars. A cool autumn breeze swept across the open terrace, but Vivian barely felt it. Her attention was entirely occupied by the man sitting across from her. Alexander Thorne looked devastatingly handsome in a midnight blue bespoke suit. The flickering candlelight caught the sharp, aristocratic angles of his jawline and danced in the depths of his smoky, gray eyes. "You didn't counter my proposal on the marketing equity," Alexander noted, swirling a vintage Cabernet in his glass. His voice was a low, mesmerizing purr. "That's unlike you, Vivian. I expected you to fight for at least another 2%. Vivian leaned back, a teasing glint in her eyes as she took an elegant sip of her wine. "Why waste energy fighting for 2% when I've already structured the distribution rights to guarantee Flora and Crumb 70% of the downstream retail profit? I let you have the marketing equity, Alexander, because I know your firm's PR machine is unmatched." It was a calculated concession. Alexander paused, his glass halfway to his lips. A low, genuine laugh rumbled in his chest, his eyes darkening with a mixture of intense admiration and raw, magnetic attraction. "You are a terrifying woman, Vivian Vance," he murmured, leaning across the table, his gaze locking onto her lips before rising back to her eyes. "And God help me, it's the most intoxicating thing I've ever encountered." Vivian felt her breath hitch. In her past life, men had always been intimidated by her ambition, preferring women who were soft, compliant, and easily managed. But Alexander looked at her like she was a prize to be won, a beautiful storm he wanted to run directly into. "Is that a compliment, Mr. Thorne?" she asked, her voice dropping an octave, matching his intimate tone. "It's a confession," Alexander replied smoothly. He reached across the table, his large, warm hand covering hers. His touch was electric, sending a wave of heat straight to her core. "I don't invest in businesses, Vivian. I invest in people. And right now, I am entirely, completely invested in you." Before Vivian could respond to the heavy, romantic tension hanging between them, the quiet ambience of the restaurant was violently shattered. "Vivian!" The loud, grating voice cut through the air like a rusty blade. Vivian closed her eyes for a brief second, inhaling deeply to maintain her composure. She didn't even need to turn around to know who it was. Julian Sterling strode onto the rooftop terrace, ignoring the frantic maitre d' who was trying to hold him back. Julian's suit was wrinkled, his tie missing entirely, and his eyes were bloodshot. The proud, untouchable CEO looked desperate, unhinged, and completely unraveling. Ever since the merger collapsed and Chloe vanished from his company, Sterling Enterprises stock had taken a massive hit, and his board was threatening a vote of no confidence. "Julian," Vivian said, turning her head slightly, her expression shifting into one of pure, unadulterated boredom. "Are you lost? The children's menu is usually served downstairs." "Shut up, Vivian!" Julian shouted, slamming his hand onto the edge of their table. "You did this. You ruined my life. You manipulated Chloe, you stole my family's merger, and now you're sleeping with my biggest competitor just to spite me." Alexander's face didn't register anger. Instead, his expression transformed into an icy, lethal mask of absolute authority. He slowly stood up, his towering 6'3" frame completely eclipsing Julian, casting a long, intimidating shadow over the trembling CEO. "Sterling," Alexander said, his voice quiet, calm, and terrifyingly cold. "You are currently making a scene in my private establishment, disrespecting my partner, and embarrassing yourself. I suggest you turn around and walk away before I ensure your board removes you from your position by midnight tonight." "You think you own this town, Thorne?" Julian sneered, though he instinctively took a step back, intimidated by Alexander's sheer presence. "Vivian doesn't care about you. She's a cold, calculating viper who uses people." "She is a visionary," Alexander corrected sharply, stepping forward, effectively placing himself between Julian and Vivian like an unbreakable shield. And unlike you, Julian, I actually have the capacity to appreciate a brilliant woman. You didn't lose Chloe or Vivian because of a conspiracy. You lost them because you are an arrogant child who doesn't know how to value gold when it's handed to him. Now, get out. Two burly security guards appeared out of the shadows, grabbing Julian by his arms. Release me. Do you know who I am? Julian screamed as he was unceremoniously dragged toward the elevators, looking utterly pathetic. Vivian. You'll regret this. Chloe will realize she belongs to me. As the elevator doors closed, silencing Julian's tantrums, the terrace returned to its peaceful, jazz-filled quiet. Vivian let out a soft sigh, shaking her head. Well. That was melodramatic. Alexander turned around, the terrifying, lethal aura vanishing instantly, replaced by a look of deep, tender concern. He stepped close to Vivian, his hands gently coming up to cup her face, his thumbs wiping across her cheekbones. Are you all right? He asked softly, his eyes scanning her face for any sign of distress. Vivian looked up into his stormy gray eyes, her heart swelling with an emotion she had never permitted herself to feel before. Security. Safety. Absolute protection. I'm perfectly fine, Vivian whispered, her hands rising to rest against his broad chest, feeling the steady, strong beat of his heart. In fact, I don't think I've ever been better. Alexander smiled, a soft, breathtaking expression. He leaned down, his breath warm against her skin, and gently pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was slow, deep, and filled with a passionate promise of a future they were building together, an empire built on their own terms. Chapter 5, Rising Flavors and New Beginnings. The scent of caramelized sugar, Madagascar vanilla, and fresh lavender filled the immaculate industrial kitchen of Flora and Crumb's flagship location. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, just 24 hours before the grand opening, and the space was a whirlwind of copper bowls, silver whisks, and flour dust suspended in the golden overhead light. Chloe Lin stood by the central marble prep station, a smudge of flour dusted across her cheek and the bridge of her nose. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun, secured precariously with a stray cinnamon stick she'd grabbed in a rush. She was meticulously piping elderflower-infused diplomat cream into delicate, golden choux pastry shells. If the humidity rises by even 3% tomorrow morning, the structural integrity of these eclairs is going to suffer, Chloe muttered to herself, her brows furrowed in intense, scientific concentration. I should have calibrated the kitchen's climate control system lower. Chloe, breathe, a gentle, grounding voice said from the doorway. Oliver Hayes stepped into the kitchen, carrying a wooden crate filled with freshly harvested, morning-dewed jasmine blossoms and rare crimson hibiscus. He had traded his usual mud-stained boots for clean sneakers, but he still wore a soft flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled high, showcasing his lean, strong forearms. You've been in here for 14 hours, Oliver said, setting the crate down gently on an adjacent counter. He walked over to her, his amber eyes soft with a mixture of profound admiration and deep concern. The pastries are already perfect. The critics are going to lose their minds. But if the head chef collapses from exhaustion before the doors even open, we're going to have a serious operational bottleneck. Chloe paused, a half-filled pastry bag frozen in her hands. She looked up at Oliver, her shoulders dropping as a wave of fatigue finally hit her. I want it to be flawless, Oliver. For so long, my life was defined by filling out someone else's schedules, fixing someone else's mistakes, and being told that my own passions were nothing more than a childish hobby. Vivian gave me a chance to build an empire. I can't let her down. I can't let myself down. Oliver's expression softened into something incredibly tender. He stepped closer, completely invading her personal space, though Chloe found herself leaning into his warmth rather than backing away. He reached out, his thumb gently wiping away the smudge of flour on her cheek. His touch was warm, slightly rough from his work in the soil, and entirely comforting. You could never let anyone down, Oliver whispered, his gaze locking onto her eyes. Vivian didn't invest in you out of charity, Chloe. She invested in you because you are a force of nature. Your mind is brilliant, your talent is unmatched, and your heart. He paused, his voice dropping an octave, thick with emotion. Your heart is the most beautiful thing I've ever encountered. Chloe's breath hitched. The ambient hum of the kitchen refrigerators seemed to fade into a distant buzz. For months, she had felt a magnetic, undeniable pull toward Oliver. Every time they scouted ingredients together, every time he stayed up late to help her test recipes, he had treated her with a level of reverence and care she hadn't known existed. Oliver. She breathed, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. I know the timing is chaotic, Oliver said, a self-deprecating smile brushing his lips as his hands moved down to gently clasp hers, ignoring the pastry bag still cradled between them. But I can't keep pretending that I only see you as a business partner. I'm completely in love with you, Chloe. I want to stand by you through every grand opening, every midnight kitchen crisis, and every single quiet morning in between. Tears of pure, overwhelming happiness pricked the corners of Chloe's eyes. She didn't say a word. Instead, she set the pastry bag down on the marble counter, took a small step forward, and wrapped her arms around Oliver's neck. Oliver let out a soft, relieved breath, his strong arms immediately winding around her waist, lifting her slightly off her feet as he pulled her flush against his chest. When his lips met hers, the kiss was slow, sweet, and filled with a profound sense of devotion. It tasted faintly of sugar and vanilla, a perfect blend of their two worlds. When they finally parted, Chloe rested her forehead against his, a radiant, tearful smile breaking across her face. You're late, Oliver Hayes. He blinked, amused. Late? I've been in love with you since you handed me that white velvet rose 3 months ago, she laughed, her eyes shining. Now, grab an apron. If you're going to be my boyfriend, you're going to help me glaze 300 hibiscus tarts. Oliver laughed, a rich, joyful sound that echoed through the empty kitchen. Consider it my absolute privilege. Chapter 6, The Grand Opening and the Power Move. The exterior of Flora and Crumb was a masterpiece of architectural design. Located in the heart of the city's most affluent shopping district, the storefront featured a stunning facade of midnight black ironwork interwoven with living, blooming white wisteria vines that climbed up to the gold-embossed signage. By 7 o'clock in the evening, the grand opening gala was in full swing. The elite of the city, billionaire heiresses, high-profile venture capitalists, lifestyle influencers, and top-tier food critics, mingled beneath the crystal chandeliers of the tea salon. Jazz music drifted through the air, competing with the soft clink of champagne flutes and the collective gasps of delight as guests tasted Chloe's botanical creations. Vivian Vance stood near the center of the main salon, looking every bit the ruthless, glamorous billionaire chairwoman she had become. She wore a stunning, backless emerald silk gown that perfectly complemented her dark hair, which was styled in Hollywood waves. A diamond necklace caught the light with every move she made. The press coverage is already trending nationwide, Alexander Thorne murmured, stepping up beside her. He looked devastatingly handsome in a classic black tuxedo, a glass of champagne in one hand and his other hand casually, possessively resting on the small of Vivian's back. The lifestyle editors are calling Flora and Crumb the culinary revolution of the decade. Congratulations, my love. Vivian leaned into his touch, a sophisticated, triumphant smile gracing her lips. I told you it was a calculated investment, Alexander. When you combine Chloe's genius with my capital management, failure isn't an option. Alexander looked down at her, his smoky gray eyes filled with an intense, burning affection that made Vivian's heart skip a beat. Over the past few months, their relationship had solidified into an unbreakable partnership, both in the boardroom and the bedroom. Alexander didn't just love her, he worshipped her intellect, matched her ambition, and gave her a safe harbor where she didn't have to be the untouchable villainess. You've built something incredible here, Alexander whispered, his lips brushing against the shell of her ear, sending a pleasant shiver down her spine. But tonight, I'm far more interested in the chairwoman than the company. Is that so? Vivian teased, turning her head to give him a sultry glance. We still have to make our rounds, Mr. Thorne. Business before pleasure. Before Alexander could reply, the heavy glass entrance doors of the salon were pushed open with unnecessary force. The elegant chatter of the crowd stuttered as a disheveled, wild-eyed figure stumbled into the room. It was Julian Sterling. The once proud CEO looked completely broken. His hair was greasy, his expensive suit looked like it had been slept in, and he reeked faintly of scotch. Following his public humiliation on the rooftop restaurant weeks prior, Julian's downward spiral had been swift and merciless. Sterling Enterprises' stock had plummeted, his board had stripped him of his executive powers, and his family had frozen his accounts to prevent further reputational damage. "Where is she?" Julian shouted, his bloodshot eyes scanning the elegant crowd, ignoring the whispers and sneers of the high society guests who used to fawn over him. "Vivian. Chloe. Where are you?" Vivian's eyes narrowed into icy slits. Beside her, Alexander's posture instantly shifted, his jaw tightening into a lethal, protective line as he prepared to summon security. But before the guards could reach him, Chloe stepped forward from the kitchen entrance. She was dressed in a beautiful, minimalist white blazer dress, looking every bit the powerful, independent corporate executive. Oliver stood right by her side, his hand firmly holding hers, his eyes flashing with a protective warning aimed squarely at Julian. "Mr. Sterling," Chloe said, her voice clear, resonant, and entirely devoid of the fear she used to carry. "You are trespassing at a private, invitation-only event. Leave immediately." Julian stared at Chloe, his chest heaving. "Chloe, look at you. They changed you. This isn't who you are. You're a sweet, simple girl. Vivian corrupted you with her money. She used you to destroy my company. Come back to me, Chloe. I can forgive you. We can start over. I'll make you my secretary again, we can." "Are you completely delusional, Julian?" Chloe interrupted, her tone sharp as a scalpel. She took a step forward, completely untying herself from any ghost of her past. "Look around you. I am the co-founder and chief operating officer of a multi-million-dollar luxury brand. I own 40% of this empire. Why would I ever return to being an underpaid, disrespected secretary for a man who treats people like disposable property? Chloe." Julian whimpered, his eyes welling with pathetic tears as his gaze shifted to Oliver, who was looking down at him with pure disdain. "You're with him? A dirt farmer?" "He is the man I love," Chloe said firmly, her voice ringing clear through the silent room. "He is a brilliant architect, an equal partner, and everything you could never be. You didn't lose your company because of Vivian, Julian. You lost it because you are a toxic, arrogant narcissist who thought the world owed him everything." Julian staggered backward, looking like he had been struck. He turned his desperate, furious gaze toward Vivian and Alexander, who were watching him from the center of the room like royalty observing a court jester. "You think you won, Vivian?" Julian hissed, spit flying from his lips. "You think you can just write a check and rewrite the rules? Sterling Enterprises will bounce back. My family will destroy you." Alexander stepped forward, his presence so commanding that Julian completely lost his voice. Alexander reached into his tuxedo pocket, pulling out a sleek, matte black fountain pen, the exact same model Vivian had used to sign Chloe's $10 million check months ago. "Your family won't be destroying anyone, Julian," Alexander said, his voice terrifyingly calm, smooth, and absolute. At 4:30 p.m. today, Thorne Ventures officially finalized the acquisition of 62% of Sterling Enterprises' distressed debt. Your board has officially ratified the restructuring. As of 5 minutes ago, your family no longer holds a controlling interest in the company. Julian's face went entirely pale, the last remaining color draining from his skin. What did you say?" "It means," Vivian chimed in, stepping up beside Alexander, her arm sliding effortlessly through his as she looked down at her former fiancé with a cold, triumphant smile, "you are completely broke, Julian. Your mansion, your sports cars, and your corporate title now belong to Thorn Ventures. You have exactly 24 hours to vacate the premises. Vivian raised her champagne glass, gesturing toward the security guards. Now, please remove this garbage from my establishment. It's ruining the ambience. The security guards moved in with practiced efficiency, grabbing a completely comatose, broken Julian by the shoulders and dragging him out into the autumn night. The heavy glass doors closed behind him, shutting out his pathetic whimpers forever. For a second, the room remained silent. Then, Alexander raised his glass high, a proud, sweeping smile on his face. To Flora and Crumb, and to the brilliant women who built it. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause, cheers, and toasts. Vivian turned to Chloe, and across the glittering, opulent room, the two women shared a long, meaningful look. There were no words needed. They had torn up the toxic script that fate had written for them, built an empire from the ashes, and found a love that was fiercely, beautifully their own. Chapter 7, Sweet Triumphs and Midnight Promises. The gentle rustle of leaves and the ambient symphony of crickets filled the night air at the Hayes Botanical Estate. 6 months had passed since the explosive grand opening of Flora and Crumb, and the brand had evolved from a trendy city hotspot into an absolute cultural phenomenon. There were already contracts signed for locations in London, Paris, and Tokyo. Inside the main cottage, Chloe Lin was curled up on a plush velvet sofa, a soft cashmere blanket draped over her lap. The glow from her laptop illuminated her face as she reviewed the final architectural renders for their upcoming Parisian boutique. If you stare at those blueprints any longer, I'm going to have to jealous concept a spreadsheet, a warm voice teased. Oliver Hayes walked into the living room, carrying 2 mugs of steaming chamomile tea infused with his custom-grown orange blossom honey. He was dressed comfortably in a soft cable-knit sweater, looking entirely relaxed. He set the mugs down on the coffee table and sat beside her, immediately pulling her into his side. Chloe smiled, closing her laptop and letting her head rest against his broad, sturdy shoulder. She inhaled deeply, breathing in his comforting scent of cedarwood and fresh rain. I can't help it. Sometimes I still wake up in the morning terrified that this is all a dream. That I'm still stuck in that cramped cubicle at Sterling Enterprises, waiting for someone to yell at me. Oliver's arm tightened around her, his fingers gently caressing her arm. Hey. Look at me. Chloe tilted her head up to meet his warm amber eyes. You built this, Chloe, Oliver said softly, his voice thick with unshakable conviction. You and Vivian took a chaotic situation and turned it into an empire. But more importantly, you gave yourself the permission to be brilliant. Never doubt that you belong exactly where you are right now. A soft, emotional smile curved Chloe's lips. With Julian, she had always been made to feel small, as if her entire worth was tied to how well she could serve his towering ego. But Oliver constantly built a pedestal for her, standing right beside her to hold it steady. I love you, Oliver, she whispered, her heart swelling with a profound, terrifyingly beautiful warmth. Oliver's gaze darkened with a deep, intense affection. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden box made from old cherry blossom wood from his estate. I was going to wait until our anniversary next week, but looking at you right now, I can't wait another day. He opened the box. Resting inside was a stunning, delicate rose gold ring, set with a flawless, brilliant-cut emerald surrounded by tiny, sparkling diamonds that looked like drops of morning dew on a leaf. Oliver. Chloe gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Chloe Lin, you are the most passionate, brilliant, and resilient woman I have ever known, Oliver said, his voice trembling slightly with emotion as he took her hand. You brought color and life into my quiet world. I don't want to just be your partner in business, I want to be your partner in everything, for the rest of our lives. Will you marry me? Tears of pure, unadulterated joy spilled over Chloe's lashes. Yes. Oh my God, Oliver, yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, and before he could even close the box, Chloe threw her arms around his neck, pulling him into a passionate, breathless kiss. The sofa was forgotten as Oliver lifted her easily, his laughter echoing against her lips as they spun around the room, completely wrapped in a love that was entirely, beautifully their own. Chapter 8, The Ultimate Payoff. The grand ballroom of the Aria Luxury Hotel was a vision of black tie opulence. Crystal chandeliers cascaded from the vaulted ceilings, casting a diamond-like glow over the hundreds of high society guests gathered for the annual Global Commerce Gala. Tonight, Flora and Crumb was being honored as the Disruptor of the Year, and the atmosphere was electric. Vivian Vance stood near the balcony doors, a glass of champagne in hand, watching the glittering crowd. She wore a breathtaking, custom-designed column gown of liquid silver that shimmered with every breath she took. Her dark hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, exposing the flawless line of her neck. She looked across the room and spotted Chloe and Oliver. Chloe was radiant in a flowing blush-pink gown, proudly showing off her new engagement ring to a group of international investors while Oliver watched her with a look of pure adoration. "We really did it," Vivian thought, a sense of profound fulfillment settling deep in her chest. "We completely rewrote the script." "A penny for your thoughts, Countess," a deep, mesmerizing voice purred behind her. Vivian didn't need to turn around to know the intoxicating scent of expensive cologne and rich leather. Alexander Thorne stepped up beside her, looking effortlessly powerful in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo. He slipped a hand around her waist, pulling her flush against his side with a quiet, dominant confidence. "I was just thinking about how a single glass of water completely changed the trajectory of my life," Vivian murmured, leaning her head back against his shoulder, looking out at the city skyline. Alexander let out a low, gravelly laugh, his lips brushing against her temple. "I will forever be grateful to that glass of water. If you had thrown it, you would have stayed tied to a boy who didn't deserve you. And I never would have found the woman who rules my world." Vivian turned in his arms, her hands coming up to rest on the lapels of his tuxedo, her dark eyes locking onto his smoky gray ones. "Rules your world, Mr. Thorne? That sounds like a heavy concession for a man who prides himself on absolute corporate control." "For you, Vivian, I would concede the entire empire," Alexander whispered, his gaze dropping to her lips, burning with a raw, magnetic intensity that always made her pulse race. He reached into his breast pocket, his movements deliberate and smooth. But instead of a contract or a pen, he pulled out a sleek, matte black velvet box. Vivian's breath hitched. For all her corporate calculations and strategic foresight, her heart completely stalled. Alexander opened the box, revealing a jaw-dropping, 10-carat emerald-cut diamond ring, flanked by rare black diamonds set in a platinum band. It was sharp, elegant, non-traditional, and utterly magnificent. The perfect physical manifestation of Vivian herself. "I don't do mergers, Vivian," Alexander said, his voice dropping to a low, passionate vow as he looked into her eyes. "I do permanent acquisitions. I want you by my side as my equal, my partner, my wife, and my queen. Will you marry me?" Vivian let out a soft, breathless laugh, a rare, brilliant tear shining in her eye. "Alexander Thorne, you really know how to close a deal." She extended her hand, her smile radiant. "Yes. Absolutely yes." He slid the massive diamond onto her finger, his eyes flashing with a triumphant, possessive heat before he leaned down, capturing her lips in a deep, burning kiss that sealed their fates together forever. The applause of the ballroom faded into absolute silence. In that moment, they were the only two people in the universe. An hour later, away from the flashing cameras of the paparazzi, Vivian and Chloe stood together by the private bar at the back of the ballroom. Their respective fiancés were a few yards away, deep in conversation about global shipping logistics, though both men kept their eyes firmly anchored on their future wives. Chloe raised her champagne glass, her emerald ring catching the light. "To the best $10 million ever spent." Vivian laughed, clinking her glass against Chloe's with a crisp, satisfying clink. "To restructuring the narrative, partner." They looked out at the beautiful lives they had carved from a trashy web novel's plot. They hadn't just survived the script, they had conquered it. They had built an international empire, found an unshakable sisterhood, and most importantly, they had won the kind of high-value, breathless love that books could only dream of writing about. And as for the arrogant, toxic CEO who had started it all? He was nothing more than a forgotten footnote in the history of their success.
Thank you for watching, dear darlings. Don't forget to like and subscribe the channel for more such story.